Winter is my favorite season. But after hearing these stories, I seriously started rethinking how I'll be spending this time of year. These true stories were sent to us by email, and honestly, they left us completely terrified. And so, this happened a few years ago when I went on a winter trip with my friend Kevin. We had planned this for months, a few days in a remote cabin, just snow, a fireplace, and total peace. No work, no phones, no stress. The cabin belonged to Kevin's uncle, and it was deep in the woods, about an hour's drive from the nearest town. It wasn't fancy, no Wi-Fi, barely any cell service, but that was the whole point. Just us, some beer, and the sound of the wind through the trees. We got there in the afternoon. The snow was already thick, and it was starting to come down harder. By evening, the wind had picked up, and we knew we were in for a heavy storm. No big deal, though. We had food, plenty of firewood, and nowhere to be. Then, around midnight, something strange happened. I was half asleep when I heard it, a soft knock at the cabin door. Not a pounding, not someone calling out, just a single, deliberate knock. I sat up, my heart already racing. Kevin heard it too. I could tell because he stopped snoring. We both just sat there in the dark, listening. Nothing. No more knocking. No footsteps in the snow. We waited a few minutes before Kevin whispered, "You hear that?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Maybe a tree branch?" "Maybe," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. We eventually fell asleep, but I kept waking up every hour or so, checking the door for my sleeping bag. By morning, the storm had completely buried the cabin in snow. We had to push the door open just to get outside. That's when I noticed it. There were footprints in the snow, not ours. These were fresh, and they led from the edge of the woods straight to our front door. I stared at them for a long time, trying to make sense of it. There were no tracks leading away, just to the door, like someone had walked up, knocked, and never left. Kevin came outside and saw them too. He just stood there, rubbing his arms. "How does that make sense?" I asked. "It doesn't," he said. "Tracks should go both ways." We tried to joke about it, try to act like it wasn't creeping us out. But the rest of the day, we were on edge. Every time the wind howled against the cabin, I flinched. That night, we locked the door, stuffed a chair under the handle, and sat by the fire for hours, just listening. Nothing happened. No knocking, no sounds outside. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. Around 3 a.m., I woke up freezing. The fire had burned out, and the cabin was completely silent. Too silent. Even the wind had stopped. Then I heard something, not from the door, from inside the cabin. It was a whisper, soft, raspy, right by my ear. "Are you awake?" I stopped breathing. I couldn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Then, from across the room, Kevin bolted upright and gasped. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I couldn't even answer. I just sat up, my hands shaking. The air felt thick, heavy, like the whole cabin was watching us. We didn't sleep after that. By morning, the footprints outside were gone, completely covered by fresh snow. We packed up and left in record time, barely speaking to each other. We never told anyone what happened, but sometimes late at night I still hear it. That whisper, "Are you awake?" And every time I do, I keep my eyes shut and pretend I didn't hear a thing. A few years ago, I worked as a security guard for a small ski resort. It wasn't one of those big fancy places, just a few cabins. January, and the place was nearly empty. A storm had rolled in, and most guests had canceled their trips. Only 2 cabins were occupied. The wind was brutal, and snow was coming down so hard I could barely see standing in the snow. No jacket, no hat, just a thin white shirt and dark pants. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring toward the cabins. At first, I thought maybe one of the guests had wandered outside and gotten lost. But the longer I looked at him, the more I realized something was wrong. His posture was stiff, untouched. I felt my stomach drop. The snow was fresh. If someone had been snow, I told myself I must have imagined it. The storm, the flickering camera, it was probably just a glitch. I went back inside, trying to shake the feeling that something was watching me. An hour later, I was back in the lodge, watching the cameras again. I kept glancing at the one near the trees, half expecting him to be there again. And then, suddenly, he was... same spot, same stiff posture. But this time, his head was turned toward the camera, like he knew I was watching. I didn't move. My hands felt ice cold, even though I was inside. Then the screen glitched, just for a second. And when it came back, he was closer. I felt my body lock up. The screen glitched again. Closer. Now I could see his face. Or at least where his face should have been. There were no eyes. No mouth. Just smooth, pale skin. The screen glitched one last time. And he was gone. I didn't sleep that morning. As soon as my shift ended, I went straight home, locked my door, and pulled my curtains shut. I never told my boss what I saw, but I quit a week later. I don't know what that thing was. I just know that when it looked at me, I felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. And sometimes, in the middle of winter, I wake up in the night and swear I hear the sound of footsteps in the snow. This happened 2 years ago. I was on a solo trip to a rental cabin deep in the mountains. I wanted some time alone, away from work and everything else. Just me, some books, and the quiet. The cabin was small but nice. It had a wood stove, a little kitchen, and a big window that overlooked a frozen lake. The guy who rented it to me told me there were no other cabins for miles. Just trees, snow, and silence. The first night was peaceful. I made a fire, read for a while, and went to bed early. The second night, things got weird. I was sitting by the fire when I saw a light through the window. It was far off in the trees, just a faint yellow glow. At first, I thought it might be a reflection from inside, but when I turned off the lamp, the light was still there. It looked like a lantern. I stood there for a while, just staring at it. There was no way someone else was out there. Nobody else was supposed to be within miles of me. And even if someone had hiked all the way out here, why would they be standing in the woods, holding a lantern? I told myself it was probably a trick of the light, or maybe even another cabin farther away than I thought. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing out there, watching. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, convinced I heard something outside, soft crunching sounds in the snow. By morning, the light was gone, and I almost convinced myself I imagined the whole thing. Until the third night. This time, the light wasn't in the trees. It was closer, right at the edge of the frozen lake. I stared at it, heart pounding. It was definitely a lantern, swaying slightly like someone was holding it. But I still couldn't see who was holding it. I thought about calling someone, but I had no signal. And even if I did, what would I say? Then the light started moving, slowly, steadily, toward the cabin. I grabbed the fire poker and stood by the door, my mind racing. Should I yell? Should I run? The light kept coming. Then, just before it reached the porch, it flickered out. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there, staring out into the darkness, waiting, but nothing happened. No sounds. No footsteps. Eventually, I forced myself to go to bed, but I didn't sleep. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I packed up my things as fast as I could, but before I left, I went outside to where the light had been. There were no footprints, just smooth, untouched snow. I don't know what I saw that night, and honestly, I don't want to. All I know is that I'll never go back to that cabin. And I'll never trust a light in the woods again. This happened last winter when I was driving home for the holidays. I live in a small town up north, and to get there, I have to take a long stretch of highway that cuts through miles of empty forest. No gas stations, No towns, just trees and snow. I left late in the afternoon, hoping to make it home before dark. But halfway there, the weather turned bad. Heavy snow started falling, covering the road so fast my wipers couldn't keep up. The sky darkened, and soon, I was the only car on the highway. I kept driving, slower now, barely able to see a few feet ahead. Then I saw something in the road. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. They were standing right in the middle of the highway. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering. My tires skidded, and I barely managed to stop in time. The person didn't move. They were wearing thin clothes, just a t-shirt and jeans. No coat, no gloves. In the middle of a snowstorm, I turned on my high beams, and that's when I saw their face. Their skin was pale, too pale. Their lips were slightly parted, like they were whispering something. But their eyes were locked on mine. I hesitated, my breath fogging up the windshield. My first thought was that they needed help. Maybe their car had broken down. Maybe they were lost. I reached for my phone, but of course, no service. I rolled down the winning in the snow. As I backed up, I kept my eyes on the figure, my hands shaking on the wheel. Then they smiled. It was slow, unnatural, like they weren't used to making the expression. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. I gunned it, swerving past them and speeding down the highway. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't bring myself to check the rearview mirror. I didn't want to know if they were still standing there, or if they were following me. By the time I made it home, my hands were still shaking. I told my parents what happened, but they just said it was probably a hitchhiker or someone messing around. But that stretch of highway? It's known for disappearances. People who break down and never make it to town. Cars found abandoned, engines still running. I don't know who or what I saw that night, but I do know one thing. Next time, I won't stop. Last winter, I went ice fishing with my uncle. He's been doing it for years and finally convinced me to come along. I'm not much of an outdoors person, but he promised it would be relaxing. Just us, a frozen lake, and nothing but quiet. It wasn't quiet. We drove out early in the morning to a lake deep in the woods. The place was completely frozen over, covered in a thick sheet of ice. No one else was out there, just endless snow and trees. We set up near the center of the lake. My uncle drilled a hole in the ice while I set up my chair. The air was bitter cold, and the wind howled across the lake. After a while, I started to zone out, staring at the hole in the ice. The water was dark, too dark. It felt like it went down forever. Then I saw something. Something moved under the ice. At first, I thought I imagined it, a shadow passing just beneath the surface. But then I saw it again, a long, thin shape gliding silently under the frozen water. I looked at my uncle. "Did you see that?" He didn't even look up. Just the current, but there was no current. The lake was frozen solid. I kept watching the hole, my stomach tightening. The shadow passed again, closer this time. I leaned in, squinting into the darkness. And then an eye opened, right below the ice, right beneath me. I stumbled back so fast I nearly fell off my chair. My uncle looked at me, confused. "What's wrong?" "There's something down there," he sighed, shaking his head. "You're letting your imagination get to you." But I wasn't. I kept my eyes on the hole, my breath coming fast. The ice creaked beneath me, like something was shifting below. I don't know how to explain it, but I had the overwhelming feeling that something was looking up at me, watching, waiting. I told my uncle I wanted to leave. He laughed at me, but agreed to pack up. As we were loading our gear, I glanced back at the hole one last time, and I swear I saw fingers. Pale, thin fingers pressing against the ice from underneath. I didn't say anything. I just got in the truck and didn't look back. My uncle still goes to that lake every winter. I never will. This happened last winter when I was house sitting for a family friend. He had a cabin up in the mountains, The kind of place that's beautiful during the day, but terrifying at night. No neighbors, no streetlights, just trees and snow for miles. I was supposed to stay for 3 nights, just feeding his dog and keeping an eye on the place while he was away. Sounded easy enough. The first night was uneventful. I made dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed early. Then, around 2 a.m., I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. The cabin was dead silent. The only sound was the wind outside. Then I heard it crunch. A single, slow footstep in the snow outside. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The sound had come from right outside the window near the living room. I waited, ears straining. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe the snow was settling. Crunch. Another step. This time it was closer. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, I crept toward the window and pulled back the curtain just a little. There was nothing there. Just moonlit snow, untouched and smooth. I exhaled, feeling a little stupid, probably just my imagination. I went back to bed, trying to shake the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. The next morning, I stepped outside to check. That's when I saw them. Footprints. A single set of tracks in the fresh snow, leading from the woods to the cabin, and stopping right beneath my window. No prints leading away. Just a path coming straight to where I had been sleeping. I locked every door and window in that cabin. I didn't sleep the next night, and when morning came, I got in my car and left 2 days early. The owner texted me, asking why I had taken off. I didn't know how to explain it. I just told him someone had been there, and I wasn't going to wait around to find out if they were coming back. This happened last winter when I worked as a delivery driver in a small mountain town. Most of my shifts were normal, just dropping off packages to remote cabins and lodges. But one night, during a bad snowstorm, I got sent on a delivery I'll never forget. The address was way up in the mountains, farther than usual. My boss gave me the package and told me to get it done quickly before the roads got worse. I started the drive, my headlights barely cutting through the heavy snowfall. The road twisted through the forest, and after a while, I realized something. There were no tire tracks. No one had driven this way all day. That was strange, considering someone had ordered a package. Maybe they just hadn't left their cabin. After nearly an hour, I finally saw the cabin up ahead. It was completely dark. No lights on. No smoke from the chimney. But someone had to be home, right? I grabbed the package and walked up to the front door, my boots sinking into the deep snow. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Delivery. Still nothing. I turned to leave when I heard it. A voice. Come inside. It was quiet, almost muffled, like someone was speaking through a thick scarf. I hesitated. Something about it felt off. You can just open the door and take your package, I said, stepping back. Silence. Then, come inside. The same exact tone, same exact words. I took another step back. My stomach twisted. Something about the way they said it didn't sound normal. Like it wasn't coming from a person at all. The wind howled around me, and suddenly, I realized something else. There were no footprints leading to the cabin. The snow was fresh, untouched. Whoever or whatever was inside, they hadn't walked in. I dropped the package right there on the porch and speed walked back to my truck. As soon as I got in, I locked the doors and threw it in reverse. As I backed up, I glanced at the cabin one last time, and the front door was wide open. The inside was pitch black. I couldn't see a thing, but I swear I saw movement. Something shifting just beyond